race and food and whole foods, like we should expand the question more broadly and like, you know, interrogate these questions of spatiality and geography. So just wanted to.
I should look that up.
Yeah.
Thanks.
What do you hope the book will do?
To basically just kind of spur conversations about race and whiteness in situations where usually people are comfortable talking about it. Because I know just talking about race in any situation in this country is so highly inflammatory, but I think it's important. So I'm hoping that this book will answer the questions or angry emails I received in the past few years from certain people who are like, race has nothing to do with animal rights or veganism. You know, I'm hoping that they'll actually be able to see it. That actually, you know, it's not that I'm not saying racism, which it still does manifest, but I'm just saying, you know, race, racialization, anti-racism, racism, decolonial politics, like all of that is at play in anything that you do, whether you're conscious of it or not. It's just by default. So I'm just asking that this book be kind of a conversation piece that, you know, people can go in and talk about, you know, why is it that, like North Berkeley Farmers Market, why is it like I never really see black people there? You know, I want to know why. And I want to ask the question without it being like inflammatory or hurtful, but it's just like, I want to know. And I'm hoping that also that people, you know, like the book Skinny Bitch, like it would be interesting to kind of have people think about what that book means in terms of class, racial, and able-bodied privilege. You know, like don't bash the book, because I try to read things to always get something useful out of it, but still, what does it mean that these books that are always #1 bestsellers, they fail to kind of reflect on these much needed questions? So I'm hoping that this book is kind of one of those jump-off points to kind of get people to start thinking about talking about these subjects and thinking like, yep, of course it's necessary. And I always say to people, it's going to be hard, like it's going to be frustrating. That's how transformation works. So I'm hoping that this will kind of spur conversations in within just alternative food movement, where class and race are just kind of, people are scared to talk about it. So that's what I'm kind of hoping. But if not, oh well. I mean, I got it together, so that's cool. Any other questions or concerns? Yes?
I'm curious, like, just from your research, if why you, like what you found on why white folks tend to be more attached to the animal rights side of veganism. Do you think it's because just the health-related diseases are less prevalent in white people, or what?
Well, actually, I haven't researched enough to give a conclusive answer yet, because I'm not in the beginning part of the dissertation. So the anthology is just like my own project, but the dissertation is going to research more into like questions like this. So my theory is, so far, of just me spending like the last 4 years looking online at forums, and then especially if people are familiar with vegans of color, it's just a forum that kind of talks about veganism from a racialized perspective. That I get the sense that if racism is not an issue in white collectivity first, it's just not an issue. You don't have to deal with it. So it may not be the first thing that you need to combat. And then my focus is not just, mine is white middle class collectivity, because there's still also issues with white working class where there's the class issue. So my focus is looking at white middle class. So also with the class issue, they're financially stable, so you don't have to worry about that as well. So I'm thinking by default, like you have the class and race privilege to the point where you don't have to worry about certain discomforts because you already have the class and race privilege. So I'm surmising that maybe animal rights is in itself kind of a privilege to jump into, because you don't have to worry about the racism, you don't have to worry about classism. I'm just thinking it makes sense. Like just for me, the subjects I've thought about, and then someone like my husband who's like telling he wasn't born and raised here, but he calls me out on my first world privilege. I never really thought about it until I met him 6 years ago. I have to think about it, because by default, you know, I have first world privilege and I'm so comfortable with it, I didn't realize what that meant. Same with my able-bodied privilege. People have been bringing up, you know, disability studies and looking at veganism. So it was something I hadn't really looked at until maybe 2 years ago. So it just didn't occur to me, because I don't live with disabilities. And I know there are people that do, but it just like, it did not construct my consciousness in a way that I felt that that was priority for me. So I think it's just like not with the fact that white middle class people tend to not look at what I'm looking at first as a reason to get into veganism, but looking at animal rights is because of how privilege constructs your consciousness around what is important and priority for you. I don't know if that's good, but that's kind of what I answered mine. But it's just like with anyone. Same with like I have English speaking privilege. So it didn't really occur to me until a few years ago that I can kind of I have more privilege around the fact that I'm an Anglophonic. So what about people whose first language is not English? I don't think about that. But I've been thinking about that more and more because a lot of the work I do is intersectional, and I want to make sure that I'm conscious of the privileges I have and how it's actually made me not realize that my ignorance around certain things is actually making me prioritize certain social justice methods over others. So I want to remind people, it's not like I'm just like talking about middle class people, but that's just my focus. But there are many groups with privileges, and if you're interested in veganism and how it intersects with other things outside of race privilege. If you go to Vegans of Color, we have talks all the time about like ableism in veganism and classism in veganism and first worldism and colonialism. So how those privileges kind of affect how people understand veganism or do veganism outreach. Yeah, just one second. Is there anybody else that would like to talk or ask a question? Okay, yeah, Marion?
Yeah, actually, so this is to just throw this out there. Have you read Andrew Hacker's Two Nations?
Sounds vaguely familiar.
Because I haven't read it in a long time, but I think that he actually specifically refers to Massey and Denton.
Mm-hmm.
And aren't they geographers? I'm not.
During Massey.
Okay.
Geography, yes.
Okay, and so he has like a very cynical response to your question, and I should say that he actually is, I think he's a white sociologist, maybe he's a political scientist, but he says that in response to the question of like why animal rights, that it's, and I'm not saying that I agree with this, but I think that it kind of jumps off from what you just said. It's, I think this is a audience in which maybe like this won't be as confrontational to say, but he says that it's kind of an easier progressive movement post-civil rights because a lot of the groups that white progressives were allied with in the 60s and 70s now want to quote speak for themselves, whereas trees in Wales still can't speak for themselves, and so he in some ways attributes it to that. So. Like I said, I'm not claiming to, put that out there, but I do think it's kind of an interesting, interesting little clip from someone who was himself interrogating his own white and male class privilege.
Oh, that's something I never thought of. That does make sense. So, I guess my question for the audience is there anything I've said that has made you uncomfortable? And I want to know why, and I'm not going to judge. I'm just asking if people have time, very quickly, if there's anything I said that made you uncomfortable. Because I've been asked to speak at Farm Sanctuary in a few weeks, specifically to talk about why is our event every year 97% white. Like I've been asked to kind of talk about that. So I'm going to talk to like a couple hundred white identified people who want to know that. And I'm just wondering out of curiosity, am I using language that may or may not be controversial, confrontational, anyone's opinion? Or should I worry about that? I'm kind of asking you, the audience, to help me out here, because this is kind of hiring people to come into animal rights and like talk about whiteness. Yes?
Well, I think you did a great job. I wasn't personally offended by anything you said. I'm not white, but I wasn't offended as a black woman by anything you said. I don't think that you said anything in a way that somebody would take it very personally. You connected it very well to like the focus of the book and the ideas that you came here to talk about. So it didn't all seem very defensive. Some people come off as very defensive.
Okay. I'm also wondering, am I stepping a little far too back, and am I being a little too like careful, or should I be a little more controversial? I'm just trying to get a sense of, next time when I go and speak, you know, should I